All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
Good to have you again this evening, sir.
Thank you.
Good. I'm going to start this evening. Let's start with the United Nations Security Council approving Kenya to lead a mission to Haiti. And when I saw that news, one of the things that struck me and I thought I'd bring to the program this evening, the first was, is it unusual for an African country to take a lead position for a mission like this? And secondly, what positions Kenya to be the right African country to take such a position?
I think first of all, let me start by saying I agree with I believe is the Chinese representative of the Security Council, who said this mission was long overdue, that the UN should have gone in before the disintegration of Haiti. Right now, the data available is that 75% of Haiti is under the control of the gangs. And it's going to make this a very difficult mission for the United Nations. Frankly, I would not have sent in a police force. I would have sent in a military force, and I would not have made it a peacekeeping operation. I would have made it a peace enforcement operation. There's a distinction between the two. And why the United Nations mission in Darfur and in the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, had got into disrepute is simply because they were meant to be peacekeeping operations rather than peace enforcement operations, which meant that the forces available, the mandates available to the forces, of the UN forces was rather limited, especially in terms of engagement with the rebels in those two countries. And that's what has led now to those to people in those countries asking for the United Nations forces to leave, simply because they felt of what use is their presence, since the rebels are still there. The rebels are still terrorizing the people. Now, this will not be the first UN mission that will be commanded if and when it is set up by an African. In fact, the first African to command United Nations forces was the late Major General Guironsi of Nigeria. And this was the United Nations forces, again in the Congo, as it was at that time, before Mobutu changed it to something else. But it's now back, being called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So it was a Nigerian, General Guironsi, who commanded the United Nations forces in the Congo. And he will be the first African to do that. Since then, we've had General Erskine, a Ghanaian, controlling United Nations forces in Lebanon. We've had Lieutenant General Aguai, who actually I think should be on this platform. He's a member of the Academy of International Affairs, who was the first commander of the forces in Darfur. So we have had Africans, commanding forces. What was the third question you asked me?
Should Kenya is Kenya the right African country to take this lead?
Yes, thank you. Well, Kenya was the one that volunteered around January this year. The president of Kenya offered 1,000 Kenya policemen to be engaged in Haiti And nobody really wants to get engaged in Haiti, you see. As I said, it's a mission long overdue. It's very complicated. Troops, not deliberately, but by an act of commission, introduced cholera into Haiti. Haiti never had cholera, and so there was no immunity to it. It was the Nepalese forces of the United Nations under the of the United Nations forces who, brought cholera into Haiti. Fine. I mean, they didn't do it deliberately. There was no shame in that. What was shameful was the United Nations refusal to take responsibility. All Haiti asked for was one, an apology. First of all, an admission that this is what happened. Two, an apology that it happened. And three, a compensation. And to think that United Nations, that's supposed to be the embodiment of the highest form of morality in the world, will now play games using technicalities, coming up with absurd theories to simply refuse to take responsibility for what happened. I think it's very, very disgraceful. And so the Haitians actually have a thorough dislike of the United Nations. So really, they are going to be hostile. They're going to be hostile to the introduction of another United Nations police force into their midst. So the Kenyans may not find it easy, but after the Kenya volunteered, Jamaica, Bermuda have also volunteered police forces. I have suggested on this platform and on other platforms that actually Nigeria should offer not policemen, but 2 battalions of the Nigerian military as its own contribution to United Nations operations in Haiti. Well, my suggestion was not taken up by the Nigerian government, so we've made no offer to the United Nations. Maybe when the United Nations decides that it's biting off more than it can chew by simply sending in the police, maybe they will reconsider and accept that the appropriate mechanism will be peacekeeping, peace enforcement operations more appropriately carried out by military forces rather than the police.
Some have argued, sir, that when you have situations like this occur, that it's very difficult for the gangs to have been able to gain as much control as they have without the backing of some people who are high up in the government and things like that. It feels to me that Kenya is taking a huge risk here because this situation in Haiti could escalate very quickly as soon as the forces get there. And what happens when Kenyan soldiers start to die on the front line in Haiti? At what point does it now become a war, if you will, that this United Nations intervention force is not able to sustain for full out war? Because, like I said, surely there must be some backers. Otherwise, these people should have been brought to book before now.
Well, you and I are saying the same thing. You've just reformulated what I have said.
All right, sir. In terms of the Haitian government themselves and how they address this, one challenge I think that came out was how do they now rebuild the country, even if they're able to bring this under control in a short time? How do they rebuild that country to a point that they're able to manage the clashes between all the different groups?
The United Nations has considerable experience in nation building. And there are resources that are available to the United Nations, not necessarily within the Secretariat, but in terms of experienced civil servants being made available in an advisory capacity. And if it turns out that the project is really more than the UN thinks it is, we've had instances where the United Nations had actually almost from scratch set up a civil service, for the country, and then from bottoms up, help them build up the civil service. And given the considerable experience of the people who are involved, who would then be backed up by a peace enforcement. I would still say that, not peacekeeping, a peace enforcement mission. Now, well, Haiti is not a big place, actually. It's not like the experience they had in the Congo or in the Sudan. It's a rather small place, probably about the size of a local government in Nigeria, even if up to that. But again, let's have a throwback. I know people will continue to say, "Oh, here we go again, blaming others for the shortfall in our own behavior." But I don't see how we ignore history if we are going to make the right judgment, the right call. Haiti fought for its independence, the first Black country in the world. It fought against France and it defeated France. However, with the connivance of the United States, who, because that was the heyday of slavery in the United States, did not want a successful case of a Black revolution at its doorstep, joined France in leveling what one call it, in fact, reverse reparation, that France now imposed heavy sanctions against Haiti for the loss of slaves to be paid to slave owners, who are now back in France. And Haiti, in order to secure its independence, agreed to pay that reparation. And all until we Africans became independent, Haiti was still paying that reparation to France. I can't give you an exact date when finally, in fact, I thought it was Macron who finally wrote off whatever was left of the reparation. There may be people on the platform who will have a better historical, the facts about these sanctions and levy by France against Haiti. But the United States was involved. It was part of what they leveled against Cuba, leveled against Haiti, and Haiti was then kind of boxed in. People were determined that this Black nation will never be regarded as a successful case of a Black revolution. And it hurts me, it pains me that as we Africans became independent, because we were dependent on narratives by the colonial authorities, by colonial historians, our attitude towards Haiti, towards Cuba, were what we embraced from our own colonial authorities. We never showed any sympathy towards Haiti for what she'd gone through, and we still are not showing any sympathy. Haiti should be an example of a country that should benefit from aid from African countries. African Union should extend the hand of friendship towards Haiti, rather than the African Union, embracing Arab countries who also enslaved Africans and making them members of the African Union, rather than, Black countries in the West Indies, in the Pacific area, who are our kith and kin. So left to me, the African Union should take Haiti as a project for them to say, look, we will make Haiti a success case of the first Black revolutionaries in the world.
One last question before we leave this. The Russian UN representative urged quite a bit of caution on this, saying that, one, it would be short-sighted to approve any force into Haiti without a detailed eventual withdrawal plan. And my question, I don't know if this would have been under a foreign affairs ministry or under the defense sector, but to what extent do you think an evacuation plan or a withdrawal plan would have been put in place before Kenya goes in?
Well, the military people on this platform will tell you, or let me say, the scholars in strategy, so I don't limit it to them, will tell you, if you have an entry plan, always have an exit plan at the same time. And the Russian permanent representative was speaking from experience, because you can then just get bogged down. And then, both the Russians and the Americans have that experience in Afghanistan, where they all had to exit Afghanistan in disarray, without achieving the objectives which they sought. when they were going in. So I hope the UN will have learned from experience, but it's always difficult to extricate yourself if things get messy.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to the EU and something that's brought up by Greece. And this is the fact that Greece is urging the European Union member states to adopt a plan that would sanction countries that refuse to accept deported immigrants by the bloc. How do you react to that, sir? Because it seems a little of an extreme case, in my opinion. But what's your take, sir?
Well, I mean, it's not extreme. Everybody is floundering around as to how to deal with the issue of immigrants. So let us go to where the rain started falling on their heads. The rain started falling on the heads of the Europeans as far as the immigrant situation was concerned, when ill-advisedly, they and the Americans decided to go in and destabilize Libya, organized the assassination of Gaddafi. Gaddafi told them that he was the one keeping the immigrants from flooding into Europe, and that if they got rid of him, they will find out that the floodgates into Europe will be open. They didn't listen to him. They arranged his assassination, and of course, from the grave, he's been proved right. Now, Europe doesn't know what to do with the immigrants, because since Libya is in disarray, the immigrants are just flocking in, not just from Africa, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from all over the world. The Mediterranean is being used not as a bridge alone, but also as a graveyard. Now, the first port of call, because of its proximity, is of course Italy. And then you have Greece, you have Spain, you even have France. There was supposed to be a European Union plan to share the burden with these Southern European countries who are the first call for the immigrants. But the Europeans have refused to put that plan into action. And therefore, they have forced countries like Italy, like France, like Spain, like Greece, to take on the burden. Why refuse that? And they've taken the position that under international law, your first port of call, if you are not discriminated against there, is where you should stay. And the Southern European countries are saying, we cannot bear this burden alone. And that is what is now leading to this call by Greece. That fine, since the rest of Europe will not share this burden of immigrants with them, if they seek to deport the immigrants back to where they came from, if those countries refuse to take them, then the only sanction that the Europeans as a unit could impose is, to refuse to grant aid, cancel their aid, cancel whatever humanitarian assistance, whatever economic aid that they normally offer these African and Asian countries, to cut it off until you accept your own people. Not just they are not saying that they will deport Afghanistans to Nigeria, or as Britain has tried to do, deport them to Rwanda. No, they are saying they will deport Afghans back to Afghanistan. They will deport Nigerians back to Nigeria. They will deport Gambians back to Gambia. And should these countries refuse to take their people, then sanctions should be imposed in terms of cutting off economic aid. It's what I will call, policies driven by they've run out of options. They've run out of rational options. So we are now starting to go from policies of cooperation to policies of sanction. And that's what foreign ministers are, or that's why governments are in power, to come up with policies that will protect their own interests. So I find nothing, I find nothing to criticize them about, except to say they've run into this problem because of their own recklessness and short-sightedness that led them to destabilizing Libya under Gaddafi. If they haven't done so, if they had not overthrown Saddam Hussein, they wouldn't be running into this problem of illegal immigrants. You destroyed their countries. You left them without sorting out the place. You went back to your own country, and you are now suffering the consequences of your action.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to the United States, or the Middle East, should I say. And this is to address the issue that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are raising with the United States. And that is the absence of a formal security agreement, in their words. And they're calling on the United States to establish that security agreement with them. And for someone on the outside, it seemed a little unusual to learn that there was no formal agreement in terms of security between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and the United States and the UAE. What is your view on that, and what should a security agreement actually look like?
If you look at the global landscape, at the end of the Second World War, you had formal security arrangements that were put in place. NATO and the Warsaw Pact. As the years went on, other landscapes were put in place. You had the South Atlantic, the Southeast Treaty Organization, Seattle, and then of course you had the disintegration of the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union, And then you've now had what they call what's the language? Well, there is they call it non-NATO allies. Non-NATO allies. And that occupies, that hiatus between former NATO and just ordinary alliances. By calling them non-NATO allies, there are things they will share with NATO, but not formalized like NATO is formalized. And it's since the beginning of the Ukrainian war that we've now had Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, being brought as friends of NATO and non-NATO allies, all kinds of configurations that are coming up as the situation dictates. So the friends of the United States in the Middle East, specifically the two you've mentioned, Saudi Arabia and UAE, are now saying that they want a more formalized relationship with the United States. They just don't want to be put in limbo as allies of the United States. What does that mean? What would that mean? Bahrain, for example, is the home of the 5th Fleet of the United States. That's Bahrain. UAE is the not capital, but the central United States command, is base is there. So you've got all of this untidy, what I would call untidy alliances that you really cannot define how far. If one of them runs into trouble, how far would the United States come to its defense? And those countries are starting to get worried. The United States has been pushing them into having formalized relationship with Israel. And they are saying, what are we getting in return? If we run into problems, how far is the United States going to go? How far can we depend on the United States? Because they thought at the time when the Middle East was divided between allies of Iran and allies of Saudi Arabia, that the lines were very clear and that they could depend on the United States. But in fact, they discovered that what the United States was prepared to offer was limited. So as the US is pushing them into cooperative relationship with Israel, they are also asking the United States to sit down with them and have a formalized relationship where United States will put on the table what it is offering and what it expects to get from the Arab countries. That is the stage where things are now. Of course, given this is probably the wrong time to start talking about this, because any treaty will have to be ratified by the Senate. And in a badly divided United States Congress, don't even bother. It's not even worth the effort taking, going into a formalized treaty relationship that will need ratification by the Senate. Not in any case, not in an election year that you're about to get into.
You talk about the Senate there. I was going to ask this question anyway. Did you see that coming for McCarthy? Did you see him being voted out the way he was?
You asked a question about the United States, I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I replied with irritation that it reminded me of the wheeling and dealing in the Roman Senate as the Germanic forces were at the gate of Rome, which was by and large final evidence of the decay and fall of the Roman Empire. Now, you've just brought in another nail in the coffin of not even the American Empire, the American Republic itself. You started impeachment hearings or proceedings on the #1 citizen of the United States. You've just flung out the 3rd citizen of the United States. And this was done by 8 people. There are 8 Republicans who couldn't give a damn about what happens to the United States. They don't even know what they stand for, but they know what they don't want. They don't want Biden. They don't want the Democrats. They are saying they don't want America to fulfill its financial obligations, about its national ceiling, the debt. And so the 8 people decided to table. But of course, you see, if you are so hungry for power that you are willing to do a deal with the devil, this is what you get. I suppose this is what people mean by saying, if you are going to dine with the devil, you better have a long spoon. Or what Kennedy used to say, be careful about getting onto the back of a tiger, because the only way to get off it is to end up inside. McCarthy wanted that post so badly. He wanted to be speaker so badly. He was ready to accept any condition by the right wing, not even the ordinary right wing, the lunatic right wing of the Republican Party. And so he agreed with them that any one person could raise a motion that the speaker should be removed, and it must be tabled and debated. And this is the consequence. Now, you may say, why didn't the Democrats in the House of Rep bail him out? Was he prepared to do a deal? He wasn't a friend of the Democrats, because he was the one who, without even tabling a motion on the floor of Congress, started impeachment hearings against Biden. He didn't table it before Congress. He didn't. So why should they bail him out? You know? So that the Americans will be doing this to themselves. Nobody is doing it to them, to themselves. It beggars belief. If this was being done by an African country or an Asian country, oh, the United States will be sending a delegation to go and twist their ears about, governance. Don't you know what governance is all about, and this and that and so on. They are the ones doing it. Now, what message are they sending to the rest of the world? Because the reason we talk about the United States, not just on this platform, on several platforms, is because the United States is still the most powerful country in the world. So we're not talking about just an ordinary banana republic. There will be severe consequences to the collapse of the United States. Number two, I think most scholars in international relations will still believe in the balance of power, that stability of the world is still contingent on one power not dominating the world. I think where the rain started to fall on the whole world was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the United States becoming the only power. And they then forgot that power could still have morality. They forgot about the morality of power. Instead, America was now being driven by the arrogance of power. And we paid the price. When I say we, the rest of the world paid the price. That's what led them into Afghanistan, led them into Iraq, led them into Libya, and all those kind of things. When there was a balance of power, this recklessness will not have taken place. So we, the world, really still have interest in the survival of the United States. But if it is going to crumble, well, I'm not sure whether we are going to get a better behavior from a Chinese hegemon, BRICS or no BRICS.
Well, maybe there is room for Africa at the top there. Let me take some.
Funny.
There's some comments here, sir.
Yes.
Because you never know. Maybe the giant of Africa may rise up and take that role. But there's a comment here that says, after decades of exploitation at the hands of the French, the Republic of Haiti to the tune of nearly $30 billion in today's money. Indeed, it was in 1947, that is about 122 years, for Haiti to finally pay off all the associated interests to the National City Bank of New York, which is now called Citibank. That's from Ambassador God knows Igali. That is quite interesting that Citibank was a beneficiary of that. There's another comment here from Suli Abu. So as not to appear to be overly concerned about foreign issues, and closing our eyes to the potential turmoil at home over the president's alleged certificate forgery, could Professor Akinyemi address the matter of how Nigeria's influence in international affairs is being further neutered as a consequence? Finally, we have, it's an interesting one. Good evening, distinguished Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. May Almighty God continue to bless you with more eventful years, good health, and more strength. Please, I pray the distinguished Professor Bolaji Akinyemi inform the gathering why his autobiography is not yet available. This generation and generation unborn will want to read his autobiography. Maybe you want to go 3, 2, 1 in your response. Let's deal with autobiography first.
No. Let me take Solly Abu issue first. Question posed to me. I'm not a lawyer, and I try not to drift into things that I cannot handle as an expert. These are dangerous times in terms of information technology. Yes, I have read the transcript released. I am not any wiser as to what is the exact state of issues. So I keep out of it unless somebody who is wiser, who is endowed with knowledge, will educate me on the exact state of issues on this certificate matter. For me to not just jump into it, I may end up making a fool of myself because I just don't know. Fortunately, I think by the end of November, the Supreme Court, the Nigerian Supreme Court, would have given us a ruling on not this certificate matter, because it may decide not to take that particular matter, but to rule on whether election was stolen or not. Thank God I won't be on the panel of Supreme Court judges. And so we'll wait for them to tell us what their own position is, and we will move on. We will move on. At that time, I may have one thing or two to say. That is after the Supreme Court will have given its ruling, because there is then no further place to go. I may. And there may be people then who are on our platform who also may have things to say. But at this stage, I think, people have lost friends. Families have stopped speaking. Members of family have stopped speaking to each other, all because of this election we held in Nigeria. This is not the first time we will have election in Nigeria. This will not be the first time that losers will go to the court. In fact, apart from Jonathan's election, there's been no election where losers have not gone all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's because they can't then go to God. That's why they stopped at the Supreme Court. But why the bitterness about this particular one? Well, maybe it's because of social media that it's so available and anybody can plant anything into it. But I said, it's not that I'm going to have, surely you know the phrase, going to Afghanistan. I think it started even when when you were practicing journalist. That's when Nigerian journalists didn't want to touch Nigeria. They went to foreign affairs and started talking about foreign issues. And so we then developed the phrase going to Afghanistan in Nigeria. So it's not just because I want to go to Afghanistan and forget the beam in our own eyes as Nigerians. But I just don't, it's because I don't understand. I'm not any wiser, even after documents have been released. So that is that. As regards when
that question, sir, before you respond, was by Badejo Adedeji Nuruddin from Federal University, Oyekiti.
About my memoirs, right?
Yeah, about the autobiography. Yes, sir.
Yes, I know. I've been promising myself that that I will write, and well, look, either it is laziness on my part, or I get involved in so many other things. To write autobiography, frankly, to me, you need to take 3 years off everything else. I mean, of course, depending on how much material you need to wade through. But in my own case, I would say I would need to take 3 years off everything else. No diversion, nothing, and then deal with that. And each January, I tell myself, this year, you are going to start. And then I get myself involved, in other things. And before I know it is December. But so many people seriously have approached me and have said this. And yes, I have to get around to it. I have to get around to it.
All right. Let me take, there are quite a few questions I wanted to ask today, but let me take this one. And this was about the story of that happened during COVID, sir, when some of the big farmers were bringing the COVID vaccine to Africa. And some people have been doing quite a lot of digging, and it turns out that the vaccine that was sold to Africa was sold at a much higher cost to the vaccine sold to other parts of the world. And it's raised quite a few issues from some of the researchers and the analysts that have been looking at this, to say that why is Africa having to pay the price for this kind of thing that's happening? And at what point would Africa now get to a stage where we have our own vaccine development plants, and we have our own facilities, and we don't have to be at the end of people still trying to make money out of Africa, despite the pain that was going around the world at the time. What's your take on that, sir?
At the time, we were all aware that there was this, what I will call vaccine imperialism going on, vaccine colonialism going on, where we were being at the short end of the stick. It's not just the price. There was also the monopoly of the products. The United States, Great Britain, France put a ban on the export of the vaccine going to Africa and going to Asia. They put a ban on it. They bought up, or even they pre-bought the product, not even knowing how much of it was going to go into the market to block us off from the market. That was the first thing. Then the second, the ones they were prepared to share with us. And I think you are referring to the agreements signed with South Africa. While they were being sold at $2.50, they were being offered, South Africa was being made to sign at $5 per dose. But now that those papers have been declassified, the one that shocked me, because I wasn't aware of it, maybe other people were aware of it, was that India did the same thing to Africa. They overcharged us for the vaccine because India actually has quite an advanced industrial base for the production of vaccine. India was signing agreement with South Africa at the same exploitative rate. So what was BRICS all over? What was all about? What was BRICS all about? When dogs were now eating dogs within BRICS. And that shocked me. But having said that, who is to blame? There was a time in the 50s, in the 60s, and I believe also in the 70s, when we had an advanced production base in Nigeria here of vaccine, whether of yellow fever, we did. And then gradually that was allowed to run down. Whom do we blame for that? Ourselves. Lack of leadership, putting square pegs into round holes. People who knew nothing about production of vaccine, putting them in charge. And those who were trained, had experience and everything, being removed from office and not allowed to do their job. Resources were no longer being poured into it. So really, we have ourselves to blame for this. I don't blame those who decide to exploit us. We opened ourselves to exploitation. And I hope that even now that we start to use such terminology as the global south, maybe it will open our eyes and know that, even within the global south, there is exploitation. And therefore, we will wisen up, wake up, and know that it is self-interest that will only protect us from exploitation. Now, there are malaria vaccines. After a whole lot of uproar that, when it came to COVID-19, there was so much rush, so much resources poured into it that they came up with the vaccine. But malaria that has been killing millions of Africans was pushed away from the front burner. Well, thank God now, 2 malaria vaccines have come on to the front burner. Well, let us hope that Africans, at least that, South Africa, Nigeria, maybe Kenya, will develop their own factories to manufacture malaria vaccines, and we won't be dependent on Indian industrial production for malaria vaccines. That's the lesson which I hope we've learned from this.
Let me pick one last question, because you touched on that India point specifically there. And this is in relation to the split that's going on between Canada and India, and the fact that India has asked Canada to withdraw 41 diplomats. And I know some months back, we talked about Canada and the issue Canada had with, I think it was China, when a conversation between the two premiers was released, and Canada said it wasn't them or something like that. Now Canada is in the news again, accusing India, and India has retaliated on that. What is Canada getting wrong on the international scene?
You've raised a Pandora's box. You've opened it up. There are unintended, there are and will be, and I don't even think we've reached the apex yet. Unintended consequences of what I will call the diasporic influence on foreign policy. The diasporic influence on foreign policy. And what this is going to entail is that the tail will start to wag the dog. You see, we are starting to see a stage where maybe 10,000 of your legal immigrants, who are resident in a particular country, will start to influence the policy of that country towards your own home country. It used to be in the United States, we used to have it, where because of one senator who has maybe 5,000, immigrants in his constituency from Ethiopia, and those 5,000 Ethiopians happen to be maybe Tigrayans, because that actually happened. They will now mount pressure on that senator against the Ethiopian government itself, their policies towards the Tigrayan. And before you know it, that senator will now get up in the Senate and say, I am blocking all aid or this agreement between the United States and Ethiopia. Just 5,000 Ethiopian immigrants in the United States will end up influencing American policy towards Ethiopia. Now, this is what has happened in the case of India and Canada. The sheikhs who migrated from India to Canada, they are only about 2% of the population, but they are 7% in parliament. And they are very vocal, calling for the separation of Pakistan. If they are the Sikhistan, they want their own area back in India to become an independent enclave in India. And they're very, very vocal in Canada. Their leader, who's been declared a terrorist by India, was assassinated. And Canada said India was involved in the assassination. Of course, India denied it. Canada was the first one to expel the Indian Secret Service diplomat. India retaliated, and then India decided to up the ante by now saying 47, as you rightly pointed out, Canadian diplomats should leave India by October 10, or India will withdraw their diplomatic immunity. So in a way, we've now got to, we are now experiencing the diaspora tail wagging foreign policy dog. And you've got to be very, very careful. Very, very, because there is no country anymore, especially in the global south, if I may use that, where you don't have secessionist movements. And if these people now happen to have a presence in some of the countries in the global north, they will now start to influence the policies of the countries in the global north towards their own country, much to the detriment of both parties, because they tend to be very, very vocal. And so we are having, in the development of international relations, what, as I say, I will call it the diasporic virus, not just movement, virus, because I think it's a negative thing. They are there, they are protecting themselves, but they are exposing their people at home. I mean, what the Tigrayan people, especially in the United States, the way they expose the Tigray people in Ethiopia, the way they exposed them, and when the war started, they couldn't bail out their people, but they have pushed their people to the wall. And who paid the price? Their people back in Ethiopia paid the price, not those people who are living in luxury back abroad. So that, to me, is a big issue you have raised, and I've answered it by not limiting it to India versus Canada, never mind. You know, I can't pronounce that word again, you know. I don't want to limit it to India, Canadian, you know, crisis. It is much, much larger than that.
Yes, as an interesting debate there, because I think that sometimes we have, particularly during election
we've
period,
lost. We seem to have lost. We've lost. Oh, okay.
Yes, that was a freeze there, but I can still. I was saying, sir, that when you look at what happens during election period, you have a lot of candidates calling on citizens in diaspora and asking for citizens in diaspora to help out. And maybe one of these days we should have a debate on the impact of citizens in diaspora on the foreign policy of those countries. Because it looks like, to an extent, the people in diaspora are only called upon when it's time for elections. And increasingly, more and more Nigerians, when you look at it from a Nigerian point of view, are finding their way into quite senior positions in other countries. And one person asked me the question, sir, that to what extent would we in Nigeria accept non-native Nigerians to be at such high levels within government as we celebrate in other countries? So that would be an interesting one to discuss. When you think about Kemi Badenoch in the UK, you think about Wale Adeyemo in the United States, and quite a host of others that are out there. To what extent would we in Nigeria accept a naturalized foreigner to rise to such positions? I think those will be interesting debates. Let me read a few more comments before we close that have just come in. This one was, okay, that's just a response. Olayinka Ogumekon, Prof, I would advise do not deny the younger ones by not putting your notes down for prosperity and students of international history. This is, yes, so past president of Nigeria, Swedish Chamber of Commerce. Before you respond to that, I will say, though, for everyone on the program, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Today is session 160. So in principle, we have at least 160 hours of Professor Akinyemi responding to different international issues. And if you go on amazon.co.uk, there is an ebook on some of the past editions of the program that's also out there that you can see responses that Professor Akinyemi has given to various issues over the time. I won't talk too much about that because I've just reminded myself that we need to do the next edition. I've just shown myself up a little bit there. Dr. Prince Obed says, too much to take from this meeting. I will bring in the press next meeting so that those outside the platform can share from the wealth of knowledge. Again, this is from Badejo Nuruddin. Can Professor Akinyemi talk about the concept of medium powers? We've talked about it so many times. We've talked about BRICS as well. Again, I will suggest on the YouTube channel, there are various sessions on there about, there's one particularly about BRICS by the Academy of International Affairs. It talked about the opportunities and challenges of BRICS. So that's a good one to listen to on the YouTube channel as well. I have Ibrahim Olamilekon. I would like to hear your opinion and to give advice as to the coming politicians would fain address. What should be the first thing to look into as of giving account of the lack of our past leaders to meet up with better Nigeria and weak administration? I think what this person is trying to say, sir, from what I can pick from here, is what advice would you give to a new generation of leaders, given that the past leaders have not been able to get us to a new Nigeria that we've all been looking for? I think that's what this person is trying to write here. Please, I hope I got it right. If I didn't, please explain yourself a bit further. Do you want to take that, sir?
Well, maybe as my own last contribution this evening, don't put it on we, the older generation. You, the younger generation, stop allowing yourself to be exploited by tribalists. You live in a technological oriented world where sentiments should have no influence on you. Look for people during the election time whom you feel will look after after your interests as a young generation, will look after the interests of Nigeria as a player on the global scene in the 21st century, and stop allowing people to play you, the young people, like a fiddle. Vote for my kith and kin, now my brother, now my sister. We should by now have gone way beyond that. We all share the blame for this. We, the older generation, who play these sentiments, and you, the younger generation, who allow yourself also to be exploited into letting these sentiments determine your voting loyalty. You rise above that, and you will discover that you will then pick leaders who will respond positively to your interests.
On that note, we'll end the program tonight. Thank you very much, everyone who has been here. And thank you very much, sir. We'll be back same time next week, 7 p.m. Nigeria time. Thank you. Good night, everyone.